The name speaks for itself. Glassware whose quality is crystal clear. Connor Knighton takes us to Ireland for a visit to Waterford.
Every glistening piece of Waterford Crystal that ends up on a table begins in a fire. What starts as a molten mixture soon takes on any number of shapes, transformed into glasses and vases, buckets and bowls, one-of-a-kind sculptures, and championship trophies. It's a painstaking process refined over centuries, which the company claims makes its crystal a cut above the rest.
If there's even the slightest flaw in Waterford, it's smashed. We never do seconds, so there's no room for error in Waterford. We're luxury, so with luxury, expect the finest crystal in the world.
Emily Brophy is the marketing manager for Waterford. Founded in 1783 in Waterford, Ireland, the country's oldest city.
I think a lot of people know Waterford, the name. I'm not sure if they realize it's a place.
Absolutely, and it's really interesting. I had some visitors here a couple of weeks ago and they said, wow, it's kind of cool that the city named itself after the crystal. Oh. Yeah. So we can't claim that because it dates back to 914 and our brand dates back to 1783.
Many of Waterford's employees, like master glassblower Edgar Evans, have their own long histories with the company.
My dad was here, I had 4 uncles here, 2 brothers. It's a family thing, really.
It's also a royal family thing. Charles and Camilla toured the factory in 2022. The chandeliers hanging in Westminster Abbey are made of Waterford Crystal. As is the ball that drops in Times Square.
For the last 20 years, we've actually had the Times Square Ball in New York, so it's made up of many crystal panels, and each year those panels change to a new theme. So it's a very special moment for a very small harbour town like Waterford to be put on the map in such a way.
Today, the bulk of Waterford's products are actually manufactured in Slovenia. In the mid-1800s, financial troubles shut down production altogether.
The company actually closed. That was 1851. It wasn't until 1947 that we reopened.
Closed for a century.
Closed for almost a century. There's hope for everybody, right?
Waterford was resurrected after World War II. A new era of creativity led to a number of designs still in use today, including the best-selling Lismore pattern, inspired by the architecture of nearby Lismore Castle. Waterford found great success in selling its products to America.
My dad used to work in one side of the factory. I was working on the opposite side of the factory. But then they decided to put us over into America and do a father and son. So we used to go to most the department stores over there and independent stores, signing the crystal.
David Boyce is a master wedge cutter, a title that requires 8 years of training to earn. He now teaches his craft to others, including yours truly.
This is where it gets tricky now, Conor.
This is where it gets been tricky since we started.
Let's just say I did not make the cut.
Hey,
Not terrible, but I would not get hired with that.
If Paul Cody spots even the smallest flaw, he tosses the piece into the recycling bin, so it could be melted down and reused.
See, there's an indentation right on the rim of it there.
Oh gosh, that subtle?
Yeah.
Wow.
Historically, glass has been mixed with lead to create cuttable, eye-catching crystal with its signature look and sound. But times are changing. Waterford has started transitioning to a more sustainable lead substitute. Some cutting is now automated. The company's trying to attract a younger demographic, emphasizing that crystal can be an everyday indulgence, not just something that sits on your grandmother's shelves.
There are certainly cheaper ways to get liquid to your mouth.
Absolutely.
Why is someone buying Waterford?
I think sometimes when you drink from Waterford, you sit up straighter. When you hold it, it's very tactile. It's about the sensorial indulgence of Waterford. So to your point, you could drink out of a $2 sippy cup, but actually it doesn't elevate the experience. It's about buying better, things that last.
Every new year offers the promise of a new you, the person you'd become if only you could just stick to those all too easy to make New Year's resolutions. Easier said than done, as our Morocca knows only too well.
The clock is ticking down once again to a new year, and millions of Americans are right now making promises they probably won't keep.
Once again, getting into shape was the #1 New Year's resolution.
Well, if you haven't already given up on your New Year's resolution to try to eat healthier, listen, I have faith in you out there.
And if your New Year's resolution was to become rich, well, it's not too late.
Studies show most New Year's resolutions are bound to fail. But did you know that we've been failing at them for thousands of years?
Even if we go very far back in history, we can find people trying to kind of orchestrate a fresh start at the New Year's through resolutions.
Candida Moss is a historian and professor of theology at the University of Birmingham. She says annual attempts at self-improvement are about as old as the celebrating of New Year's itself.
The ancient Babylonians had a big celebration, almost 2 weeks long, where they celebrated the new year around springtime in March or April and would make resolutions. And they were small. So pay off like small debts. They would make sort of small vows about better behavior. And the Romans would do the same thing.
In 46 BC, Julius Caesar created a new Roman calendar that started the new year on the first day of January. January was named for the Roman god Janus, whose two faces look forward and back.
And that's really important for how we think about New Year's as a kind of taking stock and starting again.
Were these kind of traditions about making the people happy or making the gods happy?
These are primarily about making the gods happy. And that's really what New Year's is about. It's a kind of supernatural spring cleaning.
Over the centuries, traditions changed. For many in the West, New Year's lost much of its religious significance. The advent of electricity helped turn the celebration into a nighttime affair, complete with champagne toasts and midnight kisses. But through it all, the ritual of the New Year's resolution remains.
In only a few days now, this year will be over and a new one will begin. Mo Rocca and Nancy Giles share some New Year's resolutions.
And back in 2008, my friend and colleague Nancy Giles and I publicly acknowledged our own resolutions. How much do I love New Year's resolutions? I've had the same 3 for the last 9 years. We got together 15 years later to see how they held up. Number 1, learn to speak Spanish fluently. Number 2, read the Bible cover to cover. I just can't get past Leviticus. And 3, complete a back handspring unassisted. It is weird to look back at this stuff, and I did have the same resolutions over and over and over again.
Those are such noble resolutions, and that you stick to it. So how's the Spanish going?
Sí. I never quite. And I have not been to un gimnasio for a long time, so the back handspring, I don't know that it's ever going to happen now.
Wouldn't it be better to approach our New Year's hopes very, very quietly so that we're all less humiliated when we don't get there? I try to make my resolutions more specific, realistic, doable. Take salsa lessons. Throw out more paper.
I was worried. I was sure I was going to say a lot of things that down the line I hadn't done, but kind of being cool and being content with one's life and living quietly, I can do that, and I can still do that.
What grade would you give yourself on those resolutions?
Yeah, I'd say maybe a B, maybe B minus. The paper thing is still really, but I'm working on it.
What kinds of resolutions are more likely to succeed?
Small resolutions. And a psychologist will tell you small baby steps. Don't revolutionize your life just overnight.
New Year's is arguably the most optimistic holiday, and New Year's resolutions, succeed or fail, have a lot to do with that. After all, there's no chance you'll achieve a goal if you never set one in the first place.
I think everyone struggles with, just the problem of not living up to the person that they want to be. And funnily enough, the whole system is based on the idea that you'll inevitably fail, but it doesn't matter because there's always next year.
Cheers.
Happy New Year.
it came to represent a movement. 50 years on, Rita Braver is talking with some of the women behind Ms. Magazine.
What do we want? Equality! When do we want it? Now!
As the women's liberation movement was picking up steam more than half a century ago, feminism, the idea of equality for women, was a new and controversial idea. Why do you think that word seemed to threaten people, the word feminism?
Two reasons. One, because they didn't understand it, and two, because they did understand it.
Now 89, Gloria Steinem was a 30-something columnist for New York Magazine when she joined with a group of other journalists to create a new magazine aiming to push feminism into the mainstream. Even the title, Ms., a newly emerging designation for those who didn't want to be bound by Mrs. for a married woman or Miss for a single woman, was an issue. As I understand it, even the New York Times wouldn't call you Ms. Gloria Steinem.
Oh, no, I'm so glad you know that. It was so annoying because for years and years I was Miss Steinem of Ms. Magazine.
Ms. would not offer household hints or fashion tips like traditional women's magazines.
We wanted to be able to write about trying to make an equal marriage or to write about abortion. We didn't want to just focus on women's outsides, but also our insides.
In fact, Steinem says she became an activist as well as a journalist while covering an abortion hearing.
And suddenly I realized, wait a minute, I had an abortion when I was in London, and why has this common experience not been spoken about? So in the very first issue of Ms., we had a massive petition signed by, all kinds of people saying, I have had an abortion.
50 prominent women signed it.
I have had an abortion, and I demand that it become safe and legal. And of course, we're still fighting this battle in some states.
Amid fears about how Ms. would be received, Steinem's boss, legendary New York publisher Clay Felker, volunteered to publish a sample issue within the pages of his magazine. Steinem and the Ms. team hit the publicity circuit.
And when I got to California, somebody called the radio show I was on and said, we can't find it. And I called Clay Felker in a panic, and I said, it didn't get here. And it turned out it had sold out. That was a moment of recognition that, it had an audience.
An audience that's lasted more than 50 years.
This is from the early 70s, spring.
Catherine Spiller, executive editor of Ms., spent 2.5 years compiling an anthology out this coming week. They all want to make you just dive in,
yes,
right?
Yes.
It's immodestly subtitled The Pathfinding Magazine That Ignited a Revolution.
It started trends, and it amplified the trends. A lot of articles about men and marriage and relationships and child rearing and politics and violence against women. And you can trace...
That keep coming back.
Keep coming back. And it shows the endurance of this movement, but also the endurance of our opponents.
Published monthly, there were lots of Wonder Woman covers and stories about women's emerging political clout. One of the most popular features has been letters from readers.
Here's a great one. It's very funny. My husband says I used to be a bitch once a month, but since I subscribed to Ms., now I'm a bitch twice a month.
The letters often end with the word click, inspired by one of the earliest articles by Ms. co-founder Jane O'Reilly, describing the moment a woman realizes she's experiencing sexism. It's really become part of the vernacular even today.
It's an automatic connection to other women who are suffering the same injustices.
Long before the Me Too movement, Ms. was writing about sexual harassment on the job.
The editors at the time had to use a doll.
Because it would have been too outrageous, over the top to have a real woman there.
Exactly. And as it was, a lot of newsstands pulled this off, refusing to sell the issue. But it absolutely represented what Way too many women in the workplace experienced then and now.
And selling advertising for a women's magazine that covered these issues became a challenge. You describe a lunch with the head of a major cosmetics company in which he told you that women who read Ms. didn't buy blush or makeup?
Right. Took me to lunch to tell me that, yes.
Right. Car manufacturers didn't want to advertise because they didn't think women bought cars?
And that it would devalue a car to see a woman driving it. I mean, they told me that in Detroit. I'm not making it up.
In 2002, Ms. started being published by the nonprofit Feminist Majority Foundation. Today, Ms. is a quarterly and still inspiring young women, according to Ileana McDonald, who works for the foundation. So to the question that some people have, which is, hey, is this 50-plus magazine still relevant? What's your answer?
Absolutely. It's relevant now for the same reason it was relevant back in the 70s, because it's providing a platform. It's encouraging discourse that still needs to be encouraged. It has been 50 years, but we still have a lot of work to do.
All of us must stand up together and say no more.
Ms. co-founder Gloria Steinem couldn't agree more. Are you still optimistic about the push for equality?
Yes, we have to imagine something before it becomes reality. So yes, I am a hopeaholic.
If it's summer, it's also blockbuster season. Ben Mankiewicz is our man in Hollywood.
They may be the most famous two notes in Hollywood history. Directed by Steven Spielberg, just 26 years old, Jaws surfaced in the summer of 1975. John Williams' theme and those teeth scared families out of the water and into movie theaters, becoming the blueprint for the modern blockbuster.
The way that shot is framed now, it's so clear now what it's for. Like,
even expecting it,
I know.
it's such a shock.
Dana Stevens is a film critic for Slate.
I was a kid when Jaws came out, but I remember that in prime time every night there'd be, these scary trailers for Jaws on TV. And so by the time it opened in the summer of '75, people were hyped.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. It was a blockbuster about summer, set in summer, about things that we totally associate with summer.
That was a big part of it too, right?
34 years after Jaws, Avatar redefined the blockbuster. So far, it's earned $3 billion at the box office.
The blockbuster has been good to Stephen Lang.
Yes, it has. I'm very fortunate.
A prolific character actor, Stephen Lang played the villain, Miles Quaritch.
I need to know how to force their cooperation or hammer them hard if they won't.
In Avatar, Hollywood's biggest moneymaker ever.
It widened the array of choices that I had. Look, one time they asked Robert Mitchum and said, well, how do you choose your roles? And he said, well, I read what's offered and accept the least embarrassing.
The formula established by Jaws, then exceeded by Avatar, is in theaters this summer. There's Mission Impossible, Indiana Jones, Oppenheimer.
I don't know if we can be trusted.
They all fit the definition of a big-budget, mass-marketed movie designed to make big money at the box office and beyond.
The truth is, the blockbuster is a concept, an idea, a strategy that Hollywood had been using for quite a few decades before 1975, when Jaws was released.
Charles Ackland chronicles this cinematic business model in his book, American Blockbuster.
In broad daylight, mighty squadrons roar across the North Sea.
The term's origin story is no Hollywood tale. It came from the American military, the name of a devastating World War II bomb.
The blockbuster was initially the highest capacity explosive that had ever been used in warfare.
And here is the 1943 U.S. model blockbuster.
There was very, very high public awareness of what this was.
Movie studios repurposed the word in the late 1940s and 50s, first as a way to sell films to theaters, later to lure audiences back from TV by promoting grand epics, often on a biblical scale. In 1959, the New York Times used the word blockbuster in its review of Ben-Hur. Of course, not all these epics succeed. There's 1963's Cleopatra.
Who directed Cleopatra? It escapes me.
Spoiler alert, it was my great-uncle, Joe Mankiewicz. 12 years later, Jaws rewrote the rules. For every big-budget blockbuster, there are nearly as many big-budget bombs. John Carter, The Lone Ranger, The Adventures of Pluto Nash, and famously, Ishtar.
There's a great affection for Ishtar now, in part because of how poorly received it was at the time and how quickly it became just this joke.
Meanwhile, far less expensive sleepers hit the jackpot. Nobody could put Dirty Dancing in a corner. Released in the summer of 1987, it cost roughly $6 million to produce and returned more than $200 million.
This falls really into that niche about the women's movie, a movie that focuses on a female character and her world that isn't sci-fi, adventure, it doesn't have any violence in it, and has massive, massive appeal.
Cold shower.
Premiering next week, Barbie.
And my heels are on the ground.
Directed by Greta Gerwig, similarly focused on a female character. Author Charles Ackland believes the movie will sell much more than tickets.
What we are talking about here are these really gigantic investment opportunities. In the case of Mattel, reintroducing Barbie as a particular item of relevance to many different audiences.
For Stephen Lang, the key to turning a big-budget film into a blockbuster comes down to a single word: story.
I think as a rule, it's good to have a very simple narrative. Take E.T. I would characterize E.T. as a blockbuster, although, it doesn't have the huge scale. But what it does have, it's got the cutest alien ever created. And the storyline is pretty simple. I'm here, I'm stuck, and I want to go home.
The fact is, what matters to movie lovers isn't the take at the box office, but what we take away from the film.
You just don't want to leech the art out of Hollywood. Think of the films that have come out of there, They've been extraordinary, and they can't be just replaced by, comic book characters and just huge stunt films, from end to end.
Everybody who goes to the movies wants to either laugh or cry, to experience intense emotions.
People want to see something move, and they want to be moved.
Right,
Something that
moved
really...
in both senses.
Right.
Moving on screen and moving something inside you.
Inventor George Ferris has no small claim to fame because it was Ferris who, you might say, reinvented the wheel. Roxana Saberi takes us for a spin.
For many, summer fun means thrill rides that soar, swirl, and defy gravity. But if you need a break from holding your breath, there's one attraction that lets you catch it. The Ferris wheel, a slow-moving salvation.
What goes up must come down.
From all that speed.
What was your favorite part about the ride?
The top part. You could see everything from up there.
It's been turning for more than 130 years. So why is it called Ferris?
Not many people know about George Washington Gale Ferris.
Paul DeRica is the director of exhibitions at the Chicago History Museum.
Who was George Washington Gale Ferris?
A up-and-coming engineer in the early 1890s. He'd been born in Illinois. He moves to Pittsburgh. And it's around this time that the announcement goes out that the World's Fair organizers in Chicago are seeking a large-scale attraction.
One that would top the pièce de résistance at the previous World's Fair in Paris.
What a lot of people were responding with were designs that were very similar. We'll just build a bigger tower than the Eiffel Tower. But it was George Washington Gale Ferris who had the idea to make something on a similar scale, but allow it to move.
Legend has it he was inspired by watching a water wheel turn.
He believed all along in the science, in the engineering, and he knew that it could work.
Even though it hadn't been done on that scale before.
Even though it hadn't been done.
Built in less than 6 months, his wheel opened to the public in June 1893. The steel structure was massive, climbing 264 feet, with 36 cars, each carrying 60 passengers.
At the time, it was the tallest object in Chicago.
Today, an ice rink sits in its place.
What was the reception when the Ferris wheel opened here?
It was an experience unlike people had ever really had before. You could really sort of lose yourself in the experience as the world below you faded away and then suddenly came back into view and faded away again.
I am high in the sky.
It's a sensation that endures to this day. There are enormous wheels worldwide. In London, Las Vegas, and this one in Dubai rises more than 800 feet.
This is the brains of the operations.
We paid a visit to the command center at the Dream Wheel in New Jersey.
What's the blue line?
So the black line is your wind speed, the blue line is your relative humidity. So there's a lot of moving parts.
No pressure.
David Moore is the Dream Wheel's general operations manager.
The original Ferris wheel was steam driven. We are 100% electronic. No steam, no hydraulics, just all electronics.
What makes a wheel so enticing to engineers like yourself?
The size, the movement, and it's a pure work of art in the sky, spinning with people on it, enjoying themselves.
We're just naturally drawn to it, both as just people, but also writers and artists.
Professor and author Karen Levis captures its whimsy in her children's book, Stop That Yawn. We met her at the famed Wonder Wheel at Coney Island, running since 1920.
There's just so much juice in the image for all these contrasts that it has, for this sort of old and new and delightful. It appears in so many things.
You bought our apartment?
The wheel has its place in popular culture. From the romantic in The Notebook
You want to ride the Ferris wheel?
to the menacing with Orson Welles in The Third Man.
Don't think they'd look for a bullet wound after you hit that ground.
As for the original, Paul DeRica says it came to a halt soon after the Chicago World's Fair.
Nobody wants it, so they decide basically to dynamite it, and that's the sad end of the original Ferris wheel.
They demolished it.
They demolished it.
And out of over 100,000 parts,
All right, let's see what's inside.
this bolt
That's much larger than I thought it would be.
is one of the few pieces that remain. What Ferris built also broke him. He went bankrupt, got typhoid fever, and died at age 37 in 1896. But all these years later, his invention keeps spinning, bringing a smile to Ron, Tom, and Cougar Peck.
How are you related to George Washington Gale Ferris?
He is our great-great-great-great-uncle.
Ferris family members couldn't resist taking a ride on the Centennial Wheel in Chicago.
When you see all the kids getting off of this wheel and other wheels, how does that make you feel?
Yeah, very proud. The tradition's carrying on.
What do you think George Ferris would think of all the wheels around the world today?
George Ferris would not be surprised at all about the popularity of his invention. He had complete faith in himself. He knew it would work. He would probably say, as he kind of surveyed the world and looked at things like the Wonder Wheel in Coney Island or the London Eye, is like, see, I told you so. This is a great attraction.
It really does give you pause, time to pause.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's just hang out up here for a while.
Let the spinning wheel fly.
Faith Saley has a Valentine's Day treat that couldn't be any sweeter.
This time of year, freezing temperatures are nothing unusual in northern Michigan. But there's one kitchen that knows a recipe for keeping warm. Original Murdoch's Fudge has been in operation since 1887, when it first opened its doors on Michigan's Mackinac Island.
Fudge is kind of king in Michigan.
Bob Benzer is now the owner.
I put a little piece of fudge sometimes in my coffee in the morning, a little piece of double chocolate fudge. You get the sugar, the cream.
Genius.
So yeah, cafe mocha type flavor. Fudge is Mackinac Island, synonymous with Mackinac Island.
Mackinac Island, between Michigan's upper and lower peninsulas, is the self-proclaimed fudge capital of America. The car-free oasis has more than a dozen fudge shops. During the summer, fudge-loving tourists, affectionately called fudgies, flood the island. To meet the demand, each shop can make up to 500 pounds a day. But even when temperatures and tourism cool, fudge remains a hot item.
Fudge seems like a natural fit for Valentine's Day.
We all love chocolates at Valentine's Day, right?
Yeah.
So why wouldn't you like fudge?
That appetite for fudge dates back more than a century.
Pour into greased pans and mark off into squares. So definitely sounds like fudge.
Joyce White is a food historian. We met her at the Maryland Center for History and Culture in Baltimore.
Fudge is actually based on a recipe for chocolate caramels, which was very, very similar. What probably happened is that there was someone in Baltimore messed it up, fadged it. Fadge is a word that means you messed up. I fadged it, or I fudged it. Yeah. Nowadays, we'd use a different F word to say that, right? Yes, yes.
By 1888, that Baltimore recipe was passed along to a student at Vassar College, then all women, in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Women would make fudge in their dorm rooms, doing something against the rules in the late evenings, and trying to get away with something not condoned in the rule book. At the same time, men at men's colleges were out carousing. It was a woman's way of being rebellious. You know, cooking in the dorm at night. Open flame, after hours. Absolutely not breaking the nutritious. rules. Right, breaking every rule in a way that was still considered ladylike. Ladylike, right. Yeah.
Soon, so-called Vassar fudge ended up at other women's colleges, even making headlines around the country. Fast forward a century, and the recipe for fudge hasn't changed much. Sugar, milk, butter, and chocolate mixed, poured onto a marble slab, then worked until the mixture solidifies. Here at Original Murdoch's St. Ignace location, veteran fudge maker Carnell Samuels turns the 45-minute process into a 30-pound loaf of fudge.
Down and out. Just grab it, so.
Scoop. All right. Right here?
There you go. Push. Look at that.
You're a good teacher.
Making fudge is certainly harder than it looks, but if its history has taught us anything, it's that mistakes can be sweet, any way you slice it.
Like vinyl records, what goes around comes around again. Soda shops are back. Jonathan Vigliotti samples the latest trend in soft drinks.
Can I do a small Italian job?
Of course.
And can I add on a pump of tiger's blood,
Okay.
some strawberry puree, and whipped cream? In St. George, Utah, 4 hours south of Salt Lake City, I'm about to get a sugar high. Woo. It's perfectly legal to drive while drinking the handcrafted bubbly passed through these windows. That's great. I'm excited for it. And so are thousands of other people
Just do it with Diet Mountain Dew.
who every day flood similar shops in town with names like Pop, Fizz, and Thirst for their daily cup of dirty soda. What is dirty soda?
Dirty soda is basically any type of soda you can think of, or sparkling water or water, and it's infused with the best syrups and flavor shots. So from syrup to like a puree, to cream, to frozen fruits.
Nicole Tanner knows dirty soda because she coined the phrase when she opened her first shop, Swig, here in 2010. How many cars are coming through this location alone?
This location probably does about 750 cars a day. Coconut and Dr. Pepper, that's our dirty.
Yep.
That's a dirty Dr. Pepper.
Since Swig served its first dirty Dr. Pepper 12 years ago, hundreds of competing shops, almost all with roots in Utah, have opened their doors.
So Endless Summer is pomegranate, grapefruit, and Mountain Dew with fresh lime.
Okay. Dirty soda's divine status can be traced in part to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which doesn't permit the consumption of alcohol or hot caffeinated beverages like tea and coffee, but in 2012 clarified caffeinated soda was fine. You could call dirty soda a new take on an old recipe that first appeared in American pharmacies in the late 1800s. Why would there be a soda fountain in a pharmacy to begin with?
It was a way of hiding the taste of medicine.
It all started with that spoonful of sugar, says Judy Levin, author of a book on the history of fizzy drinks. But soon, soda became a treat as elaborate soda fountains sprung up in nearly every town.
For not very much money, you leave the ordinary world and you go into some place that is mirrored and sparkling.
Pete Freeman serves up soda floats,
secret chocolate syrup,
and egg creams at his Brooklyn Soda Fountain pharmacy.
And now what we have is something called a pink poodle.
He credits Prohibition and out-of-work bartenders with turning soda into a special occasion.
It's not just about sugar, and it's not just about refreshment. It's so much more than that. It's about satisfying your need for connection. It's about satisfying your need for fun.
Eventually, people figured out how to bottle fizzy drinks, turning the soda fountain into a relic. But from Brooklyn to St. George, people are lining up for a little nostalgia with a twist.
We want to be the best part of their day and the fun part of their day.
It's believed the very first surfboards date back to Peru some 5,000 years ago. As Tracy Smith tells us, surfboard design has come a long way.
Nope, we're not in Kansas anymore. Surfing off the California coast is as popular as it's ever been. From the party wave riders at Malibu to the folks chillin' at Doheny, where you can sit for hours in the lineup, just waiting for the right wave.
And for that, you need just the right board. This one is big and wide, made out of foam. It's great for surfing little waves like this. In fact, just about anyone could ride it. But in surfing, it wasn't always that way.
Surfing was once a sport reserved for Hawaiian royalty, who rode the waves on boards of solid wood that were long, narrow, and majestically heavy.
It's 140 pounds.
140 pounds? So how did they even get it out to the beach?
If you're royalty, they carry it for you.
Patty Paniccia used to surf for a living, one of the few female pro surfers back in the 1970s, when the surfing world was mostly a boys' club. Here she was at a contest in Hawaii, cranking a perfect bottom turn on a big wave. And, well, she had to be a pretty good swimmer, too.
This board would be about the 1940s. It's the first
Today, she's a trustee of the Surfing Heritage and Culture Center.
It's got some mahogany
in San Clemente.
It's got a little more shape than the older ones, right?
Yes, it does.
And this looks like it's heavy, too.
Oh, it's not as heavy. I think this is about 55 pounds.
Still.
Yeah.
By the late 50s, boards got shorter and lighter.
Let's go!
And surfing had taken its place in the popular culture. Surfboard maker Hobie Alter, who started making boards with lightweight balsa wood, switched to polyurethane foam and helped take the sport to the next level. Hobie's Dana Point, California store is still thriving, and his namesake Hobie surfboards are still made the old school way. Shaper Gary Larson starts with a blank piece of foam and custom carves it for a surfer's specific needs. He'll angle the sides or rails to help a board stay put on a steep wave face, sharpen the nose for high-performance turns, or carve a wider tail for stability.
These are stringers, so these are wood.
Some boards have thin strips of wood, called stringers, running down the middle for added stiffness and style. This model runs around $1,800, but each surfboard is different.
I've had boards that I've tried to duplicate for myself, and each board has its own characteristics.
It's like snowflakes, no two are alike when they're
agree.
hand-shaped.
Yeah, it's a good analogy.
Don't get me wrong, you can buy a machine-made board too, like the one I'm paddling here. They're often cheaper and easier to ride. But they'll never have that certain something that a shaper puts into a board when they're making one just for you.
I'm going to ask you a hippy-dippy question now. Do these boards speak to you?
That's a common question. Yeah, I guess I do feel like there's a little more soul in a hand-shaped board.
Of course, no matter how good a surfboard's design, it's only as good as the surfer and the waves that day. And every one of those is different too.
La Grassa, the fat one, may seem an unflattering nickname for a city with the oldest university in Europe, but the sobriquet is actually a compliment. Bologna is the gastronomic heart of Italy, a place where food is an art form. And nothing epitomizes it like the delicacy that was born here, gelato. The serving area of a gelateria is a feast for the eyes. A quick one on the way home from work here isn't a drink, it's a gelato. So naturally, Bologna is home to the first ever Gelato University.
Gusto numero 2, facciamo I variegati.
Term papers here are hands-on production.
Siamo 10 gruppi, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Gianpaolo Valli has been teaching for 25 years.
We pasteurize at 85 degrees. We cooling at 4 degrees centigrade.
Students come from around the world, looking for a way to beat unemployment, or just looking for change. The profit margins for a gelateria are huge. It costs less than $2 to make a pound of gelato, which can sell for up to $15. Technique can be learned in a month, but perfect gelato needs more than a recipe.
Without passion, any technical part decrease.
This assignment of the day was a basic flavor, not as easy as it sounds.
Avete visto che ci sono 10 stracciatelle diverse?
We have a mixture, Gianpaolo tells them, 10 different kinds of stracciatella.
Pulirete le macchine perché vanno pulite.
The coffee break is a tasting session, and pointers from teacher Pietro Bianchetto on customer relations.
It's important that the gelato tastes good, but it's also important how to communicate to people that our gelato is good, that our gelato is natural.
Gelato is Italian for frozen, but contrary to popular belief, it's not ice cream. By comparison, gelato is practically a health food, with a mere 7% fat content, barely a third of that found in ice cream. Flavor comes from almost any natural ingredient you can imagine. The exception is a specialty version using alcohol. A splash of aperitif, a deluge of Prosecco. Add to the gelato, cover with whipped up fresh oranges, and sublime, but I wouldn't want to drive after one of these. Flavored frozen treats were recorded as far back as Mesopotamian times. Gelato, as we know it, was an indulgence for aristocrats in the 16th century. There are more than 600 recognized flavors. This gelateria copyrighted 6 of them, named after the owner's children. Gelato makers like to tout their product as the flagship of Made in Italy, but in fact, the real revolution in the history of gelato was made in America. In 1903, an Italian immigrant applied in Washington, D.C. to patent a device to produce the innovation that made gelato available to everyone: the ice cream cone. And then there are wickedly wonderful temptations like these. Gelato inspired prose by Tolstoy and Honoré de Balzac. In Madame Bovary, Gustave Flaubert described a woman eating gelato, her eyes half closed, a spoon between her teeth. And if you think that's too sensual an image for a frozen food, you've never had real gelato.